So on to our next anti-pattern, which I've called Create the World. And what this describes is a test which has an absolutely massive setup burden. So it's almost like you need to initialize so many components around the system just to get what should be a simple test to run. And this is a sign of your system being too tightly coupled, or perhaps you're trying to test too much of the system at once. In which case you need to look at your dependencies, look at what you're actually trying to test, and try and break that down so that there's far less setup involved. Because with such a large setup, it can make the tests really quite unreadable. It can make it quite hard to figure out exactly what state the system is in when you're running the test. It can also make tests slow to run, given that every test must have this test setup run before it. And it also tends to propagate even larger test setups and common test setups, where because that setup is so complex, a lot of tests end up reusing that setup, even when they don't really need to know or care about half of the data that it's setting up. This in turn can make tests quite brittle. So if you need a new piece of setup for one test, then how do you go about creating that? It can be very difficult to work with such large test setups. Now, this increased test complexity can often be a sign of the actual application complexity of the system you're trying to test. So there is a reason you need quite a large test setup, because your application dependencies aren't well defined. Your application isn't well designed, so you've got high degrees of coupling in your application, which are forcing you to have this complex test setup.